Chapter 1 Meanwhile Out West. While the Civil War was being fought, and afterwards too, there was a war in the West. It was the new settlers fighting the Indians, the buffalo, and nature for control of the land. The buffalo didn't have a chance. And nature, well, nature is tough, but no match for people. 600-year-old trees got axed. Big areas like Wisconsin cut over, were left nude and unable to grow anything. A few people were beginning to worry about the environment, but hardly anyone listened to them. As far as the Indians, they were intelligent and resourceful, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. They didn't have much of a chance either. The settlers had been fighting wars with the Indians since the Pequot War back in Massachusetts in 1631. The wars were all over the same thing: land and who controlled it. The Native Americans had been promised in treaty after treaty that if they would just move once more, they would be left alone. First, they were asked to move across the Appalachians, then west of the Mississippi. Now it was all the good land left in the West. Well, they wouldn't do it. But they weren't given a choice. At least it wasn't much of a choice. It was move or fight. And that led to 30 years of Indian wars in the West. You'll hear more about the outcome. You'll hear more about them. The outcome wasn't good for the Native Americans. It is hard to blame the people who took their land. They were just ordinary people who had been told there was free land in the West, so they'd come to settle it. Many had also been told awful, untrue stories about the Native Americans. They thought all Indians were savages and cruel and monster-like. They were terrified of Indians and wanted them all to disappear. And some Indians were killing innocent people. Besides, the settlers weren't having an easy time. Part of the problem was an economic depression in the East. It came on suddenly, and then thousands of people were out of work. Many of them headed west across the Mississippi. But they found farming in the prairie lands different and difficult, much harder than farming in the East. Plains farmers needed to be able to stand up to extremes of heat and cold, and to violent storms. There was something else about this kind of farming that was important, and something new to the Easterners. A big investment of capital, which means money, was needed for farm equipment and seeds. Many farmers weren't prepared. In God we trusted, in Kansas we busted, said the signs in the covered wagons headed back east. About 1/3 of the people who came west turned around and went back home. But despite these hardships and the roller coaster economic conditions, mostly there was optimism. The midsection of the nation began to produce so much wheat it was called the nation's breadbasket. Western ranchers were raising cattle and sheep to put steaks and chops on people's dinner plates. Western miners were digging up important minerals. Railroads could take these products to faraway places. In the 1870s, no one knew quite where the nation was headed, but it was easy to see it was going in new directions, and fast. Cities were springing up everywhere. Ohio cities were among the fastest growing. Chicago was the nation's busiest port. Chicago, a port in the middle of the country? Look at a map and see how this could be. Factories spurred the growth in most cities. They produced affordable goods and jobs too, especially for the new immigrants. American citizens were beginning to have the comforts and possessions beyond anyone's dreams. Presidents and Congresses couldn't seem to keep up with all the new ideas, opportunities, and problems. But who could? Before the Civil War, the United States had been a midget in world affairs. Now it was in a growth spurt. Before long, the nation would be an industrial and agricultural giant. All right, taking a look at the map on page 5. You'll notice the darker green area is the area of tall grass, making it harder to farm. And the short grass, this nation, this prairie land, America's prairie, the vast grassland in the center of the United States, was home to millions of bison, wolves, grizzly bears, and other animals, including several billion prairie dogs. During the late 1800s, farmers and ranchers transformed this grassland into the richest agricultural region in the world.